friends, I have come here several times, and now I am coming after nearly 3 years. Last time when I came, our late Swami was still present with us, and this time, of course, I miss him. I am very happy to come once again to this Vedanta Society. Swami Chaitanananda is here, a very dear younger brother for me, and I see so many old friends also present here. So I am in a very beautiful atmosphere in this chapel today, and we are also here to discuss a very important theme for the very survival of humanity in this age: science and religion. I shall deal with this vast subject only briefly during the 1 hour I shall be speaking. But that book referred to by Swami Chaitanananda, Science and Religion, a small book of 220 or so pages, contains a more detailed exposition of the subject of science and religion and faith and reason. During this 1 hour, I shall try to indicate the beautiful harmony between physical science and religion as understood in the Hindu tradition. It is so different from the approach that these two subjects received in the whole of Western tradition. Constant conflict between science and religion, constant conflict between religion and religion, denomination and denomination. When we are educated in this kind of a tradition, we cannot imagine that there can be another tradition where this conflict doesn't occur. And I am here to convey to you this profound aspect of the Indian tradition. There is absolutely no conflict from the Indian point of view between physical sciences and the science of religion. It is this central theme that I shall try to convey to you, and if there are many things that are unsaid or half said, we can clarify them at the time of the questions. A lecture and a question together help to enlarge, deepen, and light up a great theme. We are all sitting, listening with your ears to something being said, looking with the eyes to the speaker. The sense organs are functioning. We get knowledge out of that functioning of the sense organs. But when you are in prayer, you close your eyes. You become silent. You shut out all sense organs. You calm the mind. These are the two levels of human life: with the sense organs and without the sense organs. The second is something new in the West, at least during the last 100 years. We never knew that there is such an experience where you go beyond the sensory level, what you call today meditation. Imagine 50 years ago, this was a freak word, meditation. We knew how to see the world. We knew how to investigate the world. We knew how to handle that world. We never knew much of meditation. But during these post-war years, it is a remarkable new development. People want to meditate. What does it mean? it is good for us to ask that question. Because by asking that question, we shall understand this great subject of religion side by side with the subject of science, which we already understand. The whole civilization today is based on physical science. And that science is based on investigation of the world revealed by the sense organs and by instruments helpful to the sense organs. We call it sense data. We organize this sense data, classify them, ask questions, get answers, discover laws by which nature functions. And that knowledge gives us control over nature's forces. We utilize these energies to improve our life. Out of all these wonderful processes known as scientific method, we have built up a very rich civilization today. An amazing civilization, because we have conquered space, put a man on the moon, sent one rocket even beyond the solar system. Extraordinary achievements of what we call physical science, by the side of which what other science can be? That question is very relevant. And many agnostics today still ask that question. What other science can be other than this? Here are the five senses. We see the world, we experience it, we study it, we control it. That too, tremendous control, tremendous manipulation, and we become rich materially, socially. What more is there to study? What more is there to investigate? That is a very relevant question. At the same time, since the post-war period, millions of people are shutting out their sense organs, calming their minds, trying to experience a state called meditation. What are we doing there? 50 years ago, if you sit in meditation, any of the parks here, they will shake your heads. What are you doing? Wasting your time? It's absolutely meaningless. That would have been the reaction. Today it is not so. We realize there is something profound to be achieved by sitting in silence, quiet, meditation, calming the senses, calming the mind, and we are on a great adventure from that inward development. It is here you have a profound approach to the subject of religion. Religion has nothing to do with the sensory data. We have the physical sciences to deal with the subject. But what lies above the sensory level? A profound mystery is hiding there. We never asked that question all these 300 years. We were busy perfecting this physical science. Today, at the farthest reach of our achievements in physical science, the other question has started raising its head with a compelling force. One famous poet, I think Coleridge, is quoted by one of the great scientists, Arthur Thomson, in his book Introduction to Science. He says, at the farthest reach of man's intellectual tether, he falls down and worships. He also says, wonder and doubt are the beginning of all knowledge, of all science. That is also the beginning of religion. Another type of wonder, another type of doubt. So today you find this new dimension, the mind questioning what lies above the sensate level. What's the nature of that dimension above the sensate level? Here are the senses, here the mind, controlled by the senses to study sense data. When you sit in meditation, you silence the sense organs, you silence the mind. Is there a dimension of reality beyond the sensory level? If it is so, it is a wonderful subject of investigation. It is worth investigating. Till now we didn't worry about it. Today we are compelled to go into it. Why? Because all the knowledge the physical sciences have given us, all the power that they have given to our hands, have made our life comfortable, but not fulfilled. So many problems have arisen. We say normally, knowledge destroys fear. Here is a primitive individual. He is full of fear. Any natural event is a cause of fear. We develop physical sciences and banish that fear. Today's man has no fear of nature's phenomena because we understand it, we grip it. So knowledge destroys fear is a beautiful statement. And yet when you study it deeply, we have enormous knowledge today. But can we say we have no fear? The ruling state of the human mind today in this 20th century is fear. All stress and strain comes from fear. All the psychic distortions of man come from fear. Only we have shifted fear from one field to another field. Till now it was in the external field, to the primitive man. That we have banished. We are not afraid of these things. But nameless fears come and assail us every minute. They give us tension. They give us a sense of unfulfillment. And today's condition is entirely the condition of a fear proceeding from some dimension we do not know anything about. There is a terra incognita. It is that terra incognita that we are eager to discuss today, both from theoretical point of view and from practical point of view. Practical point of view, I have already said, why should I remain peaceless and tense when I have everything around me? Very practical question. Most people have everything the body and mind need. Food, shelter, clothing, comfort, pleasure, all the gadgets, everything is there. And a first-class house. But yet, I am not happy. I am not fulfilled. I can't live at peace with the next individual. I can't communicate with that individual. What has happened to me? Some profound unfulfillment. A tremendous sense of fear and anxiety. The word anxiety comes again and again in modern literature. What is it due to? This question when you ask, you turn to the great sages of the Upanishads, 4,000 years ago, who dealt with this subject with a thoroughness rarely equaled in history. A study of man in depth. We study him from the outside, just like we study any object in this world. That's what physical sciences do, starting with astronomy, physics, chemistry, botany, zoology. Then we study the human system, physiology, anatomy, neurology. Then we go to behavioristic psychology. All this is an external study based on sensory data. All this constitutes physical science. After all these studies, something is missing. Some nameless fear is gnawing at my heart. And that is the prevailing condition of man in this beautiful civilization of ours. That is why the mind is compelled to seek for another avenue to human life and human destiny. Physical science alone will not do. There must be a science higher than this, which goes deeper into the human system. And what is that? Vedanta, in the ancient Upanishads, after a thorough investigation into this great subject, told us This is the science of man in depth. The word in Sanskrit is Adhyatma Vidya. Man as the Atman, the infinite divine self that is in man, beyond the body, beyond the senses, beyond the intellect, beyond the ego, that infinite self, that is our true nature, ever pure, ever free, ever illumined, is that internal nature of man. These senses cannot reveal that. This mind cannot reveal it. So long as the mind is tied to the sense organs, this mind cannot reveal it. And yet, it is part and parcel of our experience. How to understand it? When you study the Upanishads, you are in the presence of gigantic intellects, men of great purity, men of great penetrating mind, who took up this great challenge and discovered profound truths about man, his growth, his development, his fulfillment. I use the word truths, not opinions, because the word used in science is truth. Science discovers truth, truth of nature. Here also, this science discovers truth about man, the depth of the human spirit. What is there? It must be realized. It must be experienced. India developed, therefore, from very ancient times, along with physical sciences, a science of religion, a science of spirituality. Today when I read Sir Julian Huxley, a late noted biologist, in his lecture at the Chicago University Congress of Scientists to celebrate Darwin's centenary, 1959, in his lecture he said, "We have many sciences today, but we want a new science." And he calls it the science of human possibilities. That's a beautiful term. And when you study the Upanishads, study the Gita, you realize that that is the science that was developed, the science of human possibilities. Why should I become depressed? Why should I become distracted, bored? Or why should I commit suicide? What is the strength that can lift me out of all this, install me in my own dignity and strength as a man? That science is what Huxley calls the science of human possibilities. It was such a science India developed in the Upanishads as Adhyatma Vidya. And remember, there is absolutely no conflict between the physical sciences developed earlier and this science of human depth developed later. It is a continuous scientific quest for truth. You may keep departments of science apart, but science itself doesn't know these departments. For our convenience, we call it this and we call it that. Just like the oceans, we call them by different names, Atlantic, Pacific, etc. The earth knows only one ocean. Similarly, truth is one. You approach it through the sensory system. You approach it beyond the sensory system. Both these capacities are present in the human being. Vedanta says to every human being, nature has endowed you with an organic capacity to investigate truth in the external world and the world above the sensory level. And the whole subject was handled with the most scientific thoroughness, with precise terminologies, precise concepts, international in scope, not confined to any particular sect or group, etc. We respect physical science today because it gives you a set of international concepts, international terminologies, which are universal. Nothing parochial about it, because it is a search for truth, truth that is there. I just discover the truth there. I don't create a truth there. Similarly, when you go into the heart of man, you discover profound truths. And these truths have an additional quality. You can experience them. You can realize them. Truths of chemistry and physics are far away from me. This deals with myself, deals with yourself. That is why this science of man in depth was given a preeminence in the Indian tradition. I may have all the sciences outside. I may get all the power from these sciences. Yet I may remain unhappy, tense, unfulfilled if this science is not added to that. Why not combine these two? In this modern period, it was Swami Vivekananda who came and said, we must combine the physical sciences and the science of spirituality. If humanity is to achieve fulfillment, individually and collectively, we need this beautiful combination. Two energy streams blending together as the science of reality in its total vision, nature and man. Much of nature is in man also, and we study it through physiology, chemistry, etc. But in man there is a higher nature pulsing, which we do not know much. Though writers occasionally refer to it, our own American scientist of the last century, Alexis Carrel, he wrote that famous book, Man the Unknown. Here is man the known, which I study through physics, chemistry in the body, physiology, anatomy, neurology, etc. That is man the known, a bit of physical nature in me. But there is something plus in me. What is that something plus? Man the unknown. He just gave a hint towards the end of the last century. He had studied Indian literature. In those days things were already, Swami Vivekananda knew him. At that time so many were here at that time. But today we need this subject very badly from, as I said, practical compulsions, theoretical compulsions. Practical compulsions I have already referred to, that in this highly developed society of ours, we see more and more human beings with distorted psyches, with so much of crime and other delinquencies, and the whole social situation distorted. What is wrong? Plenty of science, plenty of technology are there, but something is missing. What is that missing? The most important thing is missing. That is why the science of religion developed in India as a science. Why as a science? Because it is a discovery of profound truths about the depths in the human spirit. And the truths are presented to you not for belief, not for conformity, but for your verification. You can check up. Verification is in life itself. There is no separate laboratory in which you can verify this. The profoundest laboratory is the human mind, this human system. Try to verify these truths there. Check it up. Then enjoy the fruit of that profound discovery. That is why we call it a science. Our great scientist, Arthur Thomson, whose name I referred earlier, in his little book, Introduction to Science, a book is out of print for last 40 years. In the Home University Library in London, they used to publish it. But he says there that science is not wrapped up with any particular order of facts. Any order of facts you can study scientifically, provided you satisfy certain criteria. First, base your conclusions on facts, not on fancies. Second, whatever conclusions you form, test them, verify them. If any subject can be satisfied on these two counts, that subject becomes scientific. That is the general definition of science given there. He also adds, you can get a good training in scientific method not only by watching a scientist or physicist in his laboratory, but by watching a great parliamentarian or a Congress member preparing a bill to be presented to Parliament, to the Congress. He also has to follow the same method. Or a successful businessman handling his business problems. They also deal with facts. They also organize these facts and classify them. They try to deduce something out of these facts and check these conclusions later on. All these things you find being done here, there, everywhere. That's why he said, any order of facts, if you study objectively and classify them, derive conclusions, and then check up these conclusions. You develop a science out of it. And not necessarily a particular science like physics or chemistry alone is science. They are departments of science. And there are many departments. And one such big department is man in depth. We have never done that thing. Now today, for the first time, as I said, due to practical compulsions, many thinkers, including scientists, are turning their attention to this wonderful datum within the human system, consciousness, the self, the ego. What is this wonderful datum, without knowing which our life has gone from bad to worse? This is the practical compulsion. But the theoretical compulsion is equally wonderful. From physics, in its nuclear dimension, and from biology, in its 20th century form, come so many suggestions of this wonderful datum within the human organism, which you cannot escape hereafter questioning and trying to understand. In nuclear physics, we are constantly told that no interpretation of quantum phenomena can be satisfactory without reference to the consciousness of the observer, because the very act of observation disturbs the phenomena. That means the observer is an important datum which you cannot eliminate hereafter. Very often, German scientist Wigner is quoted, Eugene Wigner, who particularly mentions it there, that without reference to the observer, you can't study the observed data. Newton's physics, this was not there. You can study anything without any reference to the observer. Today, the observer becomes an important datum in dealing with the data of observation. And so another scientist, Wheeler, comes forward, John Wheeler, and says, let us give a new name, more appropriate to this term, observer. It is not merely observer, but participator is a new term he has coined, dealing with the scientist who is studying nuclear phenomena. Participator in the knowledge that is being created. So from these theoretical considerations in physics, you find the time has come to throw the searchlight a little from the observed to the observer, from the object to the subject. What is this man? What is his consciousness? What is man as subject, as observer, as the self? It's very important for us today, says nuclear physics. Come to biology. Another wonderful idea rises to the surface in dealing with the subject of life and evolution. Evolution became cosmic first, then became organic when the living cell appeared. That living cell was a breakthrough in evolution according to 20th century biology, where matter developed the capacity to duplicate itself. That's the definition of a cell. Matter duplicating itself is called a cell. And that cell contains this principle called consciousness, mentality, awareness, very rudimentary form and yet significant enough to make it separate from the previous cosmic evolution. Vivekananda referred to it in his lectures in Jnana Yoga. Here is a tiny worm, insect, sitting on the rail track. A train is coming from the distance. It feels the vibration. It wants to survive. It wants to protect itself. It quietly moves aside, and the train passes. What a difference between this and that. There's a gigantic machine, so full of power, can destroy all these insects, even you and me. And yet, in this insect, there is a new dimension. It can plan, it can act on its own, it can move aside and protect itself, whereas the train goes only in the track that is given to it. So that a new datum appears in evolution at the organic level. And when you study organic evolution from that cell up to man, you find the greatest work is to strengthen this new datum, to make it variegated in expression. Every organic development makes for a clarification of this center of consciousness and its grip on the external world. The cell has some grip on the external world. If you put a little poison in a solution containing the cell, that cell will try to protect itself from that poison. That is its, what you call, self-conscious choice action. It can do what it likes to do. That's the nature of life. But in man, this has become tremendously organized and created new areas of significance. Why? In human beings, not only there is consciousness of the world, consciousness of the environment, but consciousness of the self, the subject. Self-consciousness is a new datum coming at the human level. Nowhere in nature you will find this consciousness of self. Consciousness of not self is there. The world outside is there, not the world that is within I. The concept of I comes only at the level of man. Even at the level of man, it comes only when a child is about 2.5 years old. A newborn baby has no self-awareness. Absolutely not. It is thoroughly helpless so long as it has no self-awareness. As soon as it gets self-awareness, it becomes capable of standing on its own. You can depend upon it thereafter. A new energy resource comes to the human organism at that stage, about 2.5, when self-awareness appears. Now today, for the first time in neurology, this datum is given its due significance. I quote often Gray Walter, famous neurologist of Bristol, in his book, The Living Brain. He said, if you doubt that this new datum in a human child makes for man's dominance over nature, that even a child can manage a horse, manage an elephant, though physically the child is very, very flimsy compared to that mighty animal that is there. What is that speciality in the child that is not in the animal that makes it dominate? This focus of the self, this capacity to image experience and react in diverse ways, not merely as a stimulus-response reaction as it is in all animal. Man has a capacity to reason, to will, to judge, and above all, to communicate experience through language. All this came as part and parcel of this second breakthrough in evolution, namely a new focus within as the self. This is the word he uses there. He calls it the second breakthrough. The first breakthrough is the living self, matter developing the capacity to duplicate itself. Julian Huxley refers to this as the second breakthrough. Why? Here you find experience duplicating itself, mind duplicating itself at the human stage. That's called culture. Culture is defined today as cumulative experience, mind duplicating itself. 5,000 years ago, the sages of the Vedas realized life and experience in one way. They died away. Experience did not die. They captured it. Poetry, art, literature, music, science, religion, philosophy. All this, experiences were captured, and what you get today is a cumulative experience, which you call culture. This could not have been done without this new development within. Animals have lived for millions of years. There is no culture. But here there is culture. This culture is cumulative experience. So Julian Huxley says, this is the second breakthrough in evolution. A new dimension has appeared in evolution, which is of profound consequence to man. But till now we took it for granted. Now when I refer to Gray Walter, when he said this, that man dominates nature in virtue of this new development, he puts this question. If you doubt what I say, I shall ask you one question. Suppose the tiger or the lion had developed this new focus of awareness. What would have been the result? And he answers, you and I won't be here to answer that question. Any species that developed this new focus would dominate life, would dominate all nature. That is man's uniqueness. In fact, Julian Huxley wrote a book, The Uniqueness of Man. And he said, man is unique in more ways than one. Remember, a biology which originally started in the last century to demolish the concept of human uniqueness given by Christian theology. That very biology, restores to man his uniqueness, but from a different angle. That angle is here. This human individual has a remarkable insight capacity which nowhere you will find in nature. It's a remarkable datum. But till now, science only treated it as an accepted something without questioning it. Today the sciences want to question. It's an important particular datum. Let us do something about it. And so, go beyond the sensory level. That is where you find this new datum. Senses are the instruments of this remarkable new datum that is within. When you do so, you enter into a new world of investigation. Very rarefied world of investigation. Just like when you go up 30,000 feet, air is very rarefied. And yet it is there. Here also, rarefied is the air. Very subtle is a realm. Therefore the mind also must be subtle. A gross mind can handle gross things. Even you can see between a common sense and science how much subtlety comes to physical science. An average man sees the world in one way. A scientist sees it through, because the mind is subtle. This mind must be still more subtle to go beyond the sensory level and realize the self, the infinite dimension that is the human being. Now, these are the various steps that were taken by the sages of the Upanishads when they created this science of man in depth. This Adhyatma Vidya created the science of human possibilities. And they said infinite possibilities are hidden within this individual. This datum called the ego or the self is only an initial datum which contains and hides infinite possibilities within. We know only the surface aspect of this ego. That's what we do every day. The child has ego. The newborn child has no ego. After 2.5 years it develops. And what do? You strengthen it. You train the child to have ego, because that is its individuality. You strengthen the individuality of the newborn child by strengthening his ego. That's a beautiful education. But we end up there. That should not be. Don't end up there. You have to grow. You have to develop. There are so many possibilities hidden within this ego that we do not know today. Today's civilization is entirely based upon human individuality centered in the ego. We strengthen it. Never in history has there been such a strengthening of the ego as we have today. Beautiful achievement it is, says Vedanta. The science of man in depth says this is a beautiful achievement. But it is not enough. It is only the beginning. Go still deeper, still deeper. This new language, the world is listening for the first time today. That is the ancient language of Vedanta. There is the science of man in depth. There's a technology also about it. Try to understand what it is. Then you will be holding tremendous new energy resources by which you can control and manipulate yourself better than what you do today. Physical science has created a technology which has given us so many good things. But we have become a plaything in the hands of that technology today. We have lost our own integrity, our own freedom. We are still creatures in spite of so much of knowledge. Therefore, this science tells us, don't be a creature. Be free. Be free. The supreme language used in the Upanishads, freedom, freedom, freedom. Man must be free. Freedom of the human spirit. That is the way to be utterly fearless. Freedom and fearlessness go together. That fearlessness cannot come until I throw searchlight of reason onto myself and discover various energy resources hidden within myself. I study only my muscular energy from the external study. I study a bit of my nervous energy, even a little bit of my psychic energy. But behind all this is an infinite reservoir of energy in every human being. That is the truth of this science, which it makes people take up, question, challenge, and try to understand. That is the science of religion in depth. The Sanskrit is Adhyatma Vidya. The word Vidya means science, from which the word video, with, all these come in English also. Vidya means science. To know is the language of Vidya. So, here is a new science, which is an ancient science, just new so far as the West is concerned. We were busy with the sense organs. And this science whispers to you a wonderful whisper. When you come to this field of study, take leave of the sense organs. It is of no use here. You can't understand the mind through the sense organs. You can't understand the Atman through the sense organs, nor through the mind based on the sense organs. So long as the mind functions at the tail end of the sense organ, that mind is not mind yet. It must become free. When the mind is free, it becomes pure. When it is pure, it can penetrate into this great realm of the human possibility hidden behind the organic system. So that here is a science that tells you that when you enter into this field, you are in a different laboratory. You are not studying an objective something there. You are studying yourself in depth. These sense organs have no value there. So that the deepest things of man lie beyond the sensory level. All the finest things of life come from regions beyond the sensory level, including all value systems. Take love, for example. It is not a sensory product. Never from the sensory level you can get this wonderful value called love. It comes from deeper level of the human spirit. Bertrand Russell, in his post-war speeches, became very, very chastened, agnostic, and even atheist before the war. He becomes a tremendous humanist after the war, seeing the human condition, the violence and destruction. So those speeches bear a new touch. What you call the title of the book is the post-war speeches, Science and Society, Impact of Science on Society. There is a book where he says here, the world is in a mess in spite of all the developments that have taken place. There is only one remedy to remove this mess from human life. And what is that? To develop a little love in the heart of man. If that is done, the whole thing becomes beautiful. He said that. Then where shall we seek for it? Shall we seek it in physics, or chemistry, botany, zoology, or today's great science, microbiology? Can we purchase some love from a laboratory and develop this wonderful quality? Again he says in another passage, the machine is the modern form of Satan, and its worship is a modern diabolism. Whatever else may be mechanical, values are not. And this is something no political philosopher should forget. Values are not mechanical. By adding machine to machine, you are not going to produce values like love and other things. It comes from the depth of the human spirit. Stir the human spirit there, values come out. Does industry and technology help me to go deep into myself? Today they do not. They keep me at this level only. But we have to stir the depths of the human spirit to bring out these beautiful values, love, compassion, service, dedication. What beautiful values are they, without which life becomes drab, monotonous. One of the important ailments of the human mind today is what we call alienation. We are alienated. Everyone is alienated. Living in a crowd, yet feeling alienated. What a wonderful situation it is. Child feels alienated. Grown-up people feel alienated. Old people always feel alienated. Why? Some capacity we are missing. We live in a little prison of our own. The body has become a prison. The ego has become a prisoner within a prison. Where is the capacity for communication? Bertrand Russell said, so long as man is at that individuality level, strong ego individuality, he is only a billiard ball. The only relation between one billiard ball and another is collision. We don't know how to enter into each other. That is a spiritual capacity. It is not a physical capacity. It is not an intellectual capacity. It is a spiritual capacity. If it were merely intellectual capacity, the greater the scholar, the more communication facility he would have. But we don't find it today. Mere intellectual development doesn't give you this. That is why we must touch a deeper dimension. That deeper dimension and the entry into it is defined in this great science of man in depth. That is what we call religion, according to Vedanta. Religion has two dimensions. One is ethnical, the other is scientific and spiritual. Ethnical dimension, what you get today in socio-political forms of religion, like Hinduism, Christianity, Buddhism. When you speak of this, you are referring to historical developments, ethnical religions developing historically. By chance you are a Hindu, by chance you are a Muslim, you are born there, but you are not a seeker. And science doesn't come until you seek. I quote famous Eddington, who said, "You cannot understand the spirit of true science or of true religion without keeping seeking in the forefront. Merely because I am born, I belong to a particular socio-political tradition, and that's called my religion. That is not religion. That is religion as we understand it today, as I call it. So far as the census register is concerned, it is a beautiful classification. You are a Hindu, you are a Christian in the census register. But science is not classified like this. Are you seeking truth? Are you seeking God? Are you seeking the spiritual dimension of the human personality? When you begin to seek it, you go beyond all ethnical limitation. You become an experimenter in religion. There you get the science of religion. That's why Vivekananda said, the real scientists of religion are the mystics. They don't live on words. They strive. They go beyond this psychophysical limitation. They realize something infinite. Among the great mystics who have communicated this wonderful adventure to us is the great St. Augustine, 4th century AD. In his Confessions, he gives you a graphic account of how he became spiritually fulfilled. He achieved spiritual peace within, how he realized God. Beautiful passage is there, where he says there, I thought God may be somewhere in the skies, among the planets and stars. Every one of them said, no, we are only creatures of God. We don't know about God. We are creatures of God. I asked my body, are you? No. Go deeper. Finally he says, oh Lord, now I realize you are the soul of my soul. You are something profound within the depth of my spirit. That is how peace came upon this great soul. What a beautiful description. He was in great distress. He was unhappy. Though he was very intellectual, he had the best of the world at the time, and yet he was unhappy and tense, unfulfilled. With tears in his eyes, he prayed, how long can this struggle continue? Tomorrow, tomorrow. Why not today? Why not now? Why not this very hour see the end of my wretchedness? That was the prayer that came out of the heart of this great Augustine. Then came a wonderful peace, a real understanding of the truth of God within himself. That is how he became St. Augustine. There are many such accounts in the great lives of mystics, both East and West, where you see the science of religion, which is the science of unraveling, unfolding the hidden divine possibilities in every human being. That is the central truth of the science of religion according to Vedanta. Swami Vivekananda expressed it in our time, here in this country, when he wrote in New York his famous book Raja Yoga. In the flyleaf you will find a beautiful statement of the testament of Vedanta. He said, each soul is potentially divine, is the first sentence there. The goal of life is to manifest this divine within by controlling nature external and internal. External nature you control through science and technology, politics and economics and sociology. Internal nature you control through morality, ethics, aesthetics and religion. Here are the two stages of human development. You achieve it and be free, he said. That is the whole of religion. Temples and doctrines and books and churches are only secondary details. Have you become free? Are you fulfilled? That is the fruit of religion. Here is the profound science that can take man, put him on the road, make him reach that great goal of fulfillment. Vedanta developed religion from that point of view. In the Upanishad, you read this wonderful utterance, Esha sarveshu bhuteshu, gudho atma na prakashate, drishyate tvagriya buddhya, sukshmaya sukshmadarshibhi. This Atman, the divine infinite dimension of man, is present in every one of us, but hidden, lying hidden. But it need not remain hidden all the time. You can realize it, you can manifest it. How? Sukshmaya buddhya. When this mind becomes more and more subtle. When it is gross, it can see only the surface. When it is slightly subtle, you can see truths in the physical world. When it is still more subtle, you penetrate all these appearances and discover the truth that is hidden in you and me. So, agriya buddhya, and mind becomes penetrating, just like this radiation, such a flimsy radiation. If I take a piece of paper and hold it, it is cut off. But this radiation, when it is subjected to a particular process, high-frequency radiation it becomes. Then it penetrates through the muscle and reveals the bony system in me. Still more it can be penetrating as cosmic ray. It can penetrate through metals. So much deep it can go. So that here is a flimsy something which we make it penetrating in power. The human mind is like that, say the Upanishads. Flimsy to begin with. An average child, his mind is very flimsy. Uneducated human beings will find flimsy minds. When you get educated and trained, mind becomes slightly more concentrated. He can penetrate. This penetrating capacity must be made of very high level. Then we can penetrate from the external to the internal and discover our own infinite dimension. That's what this shloka, this verse said. Drishyate tvagriya buddhya sukshmaya sukshmadarshibihi. As the mind becomes purer and purer, free from bondage to the sensory system, it becomes penetrating in power. And then one day it is able to realize, yes, now I realize my true nature. I am not this tiny physical system. I am not this psychic system. There is something else about me. That man, the unknown, becomes a palpable realization when this is achieved by man. Man, the unknown. Man, the spiritual. This concept is expressed in one famous passage in the Chandogya Upanishad. Several scientists today quote that passage when they deal with human life. Men like J.B.S. Haldane or Schrödinger, the famous nuclear scientist. The other is microbiology, this is nuclear scientist. They quote this famous passage in the Upanishads. What is the nature of man? What is he truly? Sensory system tells me I am a tiny bit of an organic system, just a dust particle in this universe. But this spiritual vision tells you something infinite caught up in a tiny frame. You are that infinite, not this. Now this is conveyed to you in that pregnant utterance. Tat Tvamasi, Tat Tvamasi. You are that. You are that. Not this. This tiny thing. A little extra heat and cold can destroy it. Or some mishap in life can completely destroy it. That's not your true nature. Infinite energy is hidden in every one of you, say the Upanishads. Tat Tvamasi is a supreme utterance. And I am so gratified to find that scientists appreciate this beautiful idea, because they are also studying nature, they are studying life. Life developed as a human system, that system containing a profound truth, which is the truth behind all nature. Why? Because man is a product of nature's evolution, and that evolution has shown how it unfolds more and more of its own inner structure. The sun unfolds one structure, the living cell unfolds another structure. In man you find a new structure coming out. And when a man becomes a Buddha or a Ramakrishna, something more coming out there. What a wonderful evolution. How many beautiful dimensions are coming out. So that this great philosophy tells every human being that behind your body-mind consciousness is something infinite. Nature is able to realize this truth through you, because nature has given you the organic capacity. No other aspects in nature can ever investigate this subject. That's why nature becomes self-aware in man and realizing the infinite self behind the finite self. That is the language today used in several books by scientists, and that is the language of the Upanishads, man discovering his own true dimension. And the result is, he gets in his hands a new energy resource. Today we have muscular energy, plus mechanical energy, which is million times more than muscular, but of the same nature. Then we have nervous energy. Then we have psychic energy, intellectual energy. None of these is able to save us. In fact, all these can be our undoing also. The more intellectual a person, the more unhappy, the more tense he is, the more unfulfilled, and very often the more cynical as well. And cynicism means spiritual death. So that mere intellectual growth is not enough. We need something more. Bertrand Russell warned, if only you increase in knowledge and not increase in wisdom, increase of knowledge will be increase of sorrow. These are the words in that Impact of Science and Society in that book. So that today we see a lot of intellectual development, lot of sorrow, unfulfillment also along with it, distortions along with it. This can end. This must end. There is a science about it. That is how India developed the science of religion. It is just a science, not something to be believed in, not something like a dogma or in conformity. No, it is an adventure like climbing the mountain. As you go higher up, beautiful fresh air you get, great experience of beauty you feel. So also when man grows spiritually, he grows in size, becomes bigger and bigger, expansion of personality, feels his oneness with millions of people, because that infinite is my nature, is your nature. We touch that core, God in man, not something far away in extra cosmic condition. This is the realization that makes for human fulfillment, a new energy resource to tame the other energies that are there, those energies which are now digesting us, making us unhappy in this great civilization of ours. That's why to the sciences of physical nature we have to add the science of religion. When these two function together, we shall have total human fulfillment. Externally, enough food and shelter, etc. Internally, enough strength to make for calmness, peace, contentment. That is why, as I began, we sharpen the sense organs to study physical nature. We silence the sense organs to dive deeper into oneself. Man sitting in meditation. What a wonderful picture it is. It is laziness from the sensory point of view, intense activity from a higher point of view. This knowledge has come to us today. 50 years ago, any child sitting in meditation, what lazy man, why don't you do some work? That's what we used to say. Today, no. Work has a tremendous place, but silence, quiet, inwardness has also a tremendous place. And this subject of meditation, highly developed in the Upanishads, even earlier. In Indian culture, it is an old tradition, what you call in the Indus Valley civilization, which is sometimes treated as pre-Rigvedic civilization. Even there you find a particular image in our excavations, where you find a god sitting cross-legged in meditation, surrounded by animals, tame and wild. The prototype of the later Shiva. Shiva is the great yogi. You get it even in that earlier stage. But it is the Upanishads, you develop a science of it, and a science which integrates physical sciences with the science of religion. And its greatest historical manifestation was in a tremendous personality, Buddha, 6th century BC. And I am glad to inform you, today is Buddha's birthday, 2550 years probably now. Buddha's birthday is on full moon night of this particular month. This is called May. In India we call it Vaishakh month. That Buddha made a science of this great subject. When you read his life, you realize the energy that came out of Buddha brought peace to millions of people in the whole of Asia. A little event in a corner of India later on became a tremendous source of peace to millions of people. Buddha sat in meditation under a tree on this blessed night. That very night, he realized enlightenment, realized the infinite behind the finite. He got up and said, I have become immortal. I have realized the immortal. I find fulfillment in life by this realization. Now, this particular realization did not remain entirely with him. He communicated it to 5 disciples in Benares, 144 miles from where he was meditating. He walked all the distance out of the desire to communicate. 5 people. Nobody else were there. No TV people, radio people, newspaper correspondents were there. Only 5 people. They listened to it. He whispered something to them. But that whisper became a tremendous force, touching the lives of people in Tibet, Mongolia, China, Japan, Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, and several areas and the whole of India. What is the power behind it? That is called meditation. A tremendous power, provided we know to touch the depths of the human spirit. Some infinite energy is lying hidden there. Man appears to us as so tiny and small. Why? We look at him through the sensory system. To the sensory system, man is certainly small. Let me quote Pascal, that famous French mystic and mathematician. Prince Louis de Broglie quotes this passage from Pascal in his article on the poetry of pure science in a journal. And Louis de Broglie was a famous nuclear scientist. He says, Pascal says, in space, the universe engulfs me and reduces me to a pinpoint. Spatially speaking, I am a tiny dust particle in this world. But through thought, I understand that universe. Man as thinker, he understands that world. He grips it in his hand. But as a physical organism, is a tiny little thing. What a profound dimension. Similarly, as a spiritual principle like Buddha, he commands attention, love, reverence from millions of people. Some tremendous achievement. Jesus, Buddha, Sri Ramakrishna. There you can see the height of religious achievement, man achieving some tremendous height, compared to which a Napoleon, a Julius Caesar, or even a great scientist is nothing. That the world understands it today. Even Napoleon said it. Two forces are there in this world, the sword and the spirit. But the spirit has always vanquished the sword. Alexander, Julius Caesar, Charlemagne and myself, we founded great empires. On what? On the strength of the sword. All the empires have vanished. Nobody cares for us. But Jesus alone founded an empire on the spirit. And today millions are there ready to die for him. This is an admission by a consummate wielder of the sword, the power of the spirit. That spirit is what is in you, what is in me. That tiny baby newly born, physically so flimsy, a little extra heat or cold can destroy it. And yet within that flimsy tiny system, there is an infinite resource of energy. Is there a science to take it out? Is there a technique by which we can make the child manifest it? That is the great science and technique of religion. That's how India expounded this great subject in the Upanishads, in the Gita, in Buddha, today in great teachers like Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda. The world today needs the touch of that great science. Without neglecting the physical sciences, we carry the investigation a little deeper. That's all what is said. There is no conflict between physical science and the side of religion, science of religion. Why? Because the methods are the same, the spirit is the same, but the fields are different. This is the external sensory field, this is something higher, transcendent, as we use the word. Buddha and Vedanta use two words, Loka, Lokottara. Loka means the sensory world. Lokottara is what is transcendental to the sensory realm. Here is the pure spirituality. That is all politics, economics, sociology, physics, chemistry, everything is in that Loka section. And both must function together to lead man to total fulfillment. That is the challenge the world today poses to every human being. And I am happy to find great thinkers are facing that challenge positively. Many suggestions are coming. One such I just want to share with you before I close my brief lecture. One writer said in the Electromedica journal, there's a journal of the Siemens X-ray people's journal, where he wrote some years ago, modern period started with exploration of the earth. Columbus coming this side, Vasco da Gama going that side, like that. We continued exploring the earth, including North Pole, South Pole, Alps, top and Mount Everest. That's a wonderful achievement. Today there is not a square inch of earth which man has not studied and mapped. Then we went down the ocean. Then we started going up the sky, into space. Wonderful exploration. These are all wonderful explorations, and science must be thanked for this great achievement. But there is one exploration waiting for us. Most important. And what is that? The hinterland of your own consciousness. Try to explore it. Tremendous treasures are lying there. Just like Eastern Americans said, when gold was discovered in this part, oh, there is tremendous wealth there, let us all rush there. Then we had a wonderful gold rush. Many perished, but many became rich. Here is another continent. the hinterland of your own consciousness, infinite dimension. Turn your attention there. That is the appeal in that article. That's why in many scientists you will find this hint and suggestion coming. It is gathering volume. By the end of the century, you can expect the science of religion will be the dominant science. Other sciences will continue. They will do wonderful work. They will make our life more comfortable and pleasant, that is all. But to bring peace to man, eliminate violence and war, only the other science can do. Einstein said it. Science can denature plutonium, but science cannot denature evil in the heart of man. We did another science for it. That is the science of God, science of the divine in the heart of man, the science of human possibilities. So every child must be educated in the physical sciences so that it may have a grip on its external life. But every child must be put on the road of his own spiritual growth so that it may get a grip on its own inner life, so that it can feel free, it can become fearless. That is a great message of Vedanta, which has a high place for physical science, but it tells physical science, don't become physical, go to the non-physical dimension. Physical makes it limited. Let us make it reality, physical, reality, trans-physical, non-physical. We don't use the word supernatural in Vedanta. Natural, and what is higher than natural is the infinite Atman that is there. Everything is nature. So there is nothing supernatural in Vedanta. One is ordinary nature, the other is higher nature. These two together constitute the whole scope of science, science physical, science superphysical, superconscious, and not supernatural. That is why scientists appreciate Vedanta. Our great Harvard University astronomer, the late Arlo Shapley, a great astronomer, when he met me in Delhi, he said, we respect your Vedanta, we scientists. It is so rational, it is so scientific. That is the reaction of all scientists, those who have studied the subject. Today we need this beautiful blending of physical sciences and the science of religion. That is how we can save the present civilization from that wonderful, tragic condition where externally everything is fine, internally everything is bad. Why should it be so? Can't we have a peaceful mind and a peaceful heart, full of love and compassion, in a world which is so bright all around us? That is the challenge faced by this great science of religion as expounded in Vedanta. Thank you all.